Good evening, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, point zero. What is point zero? Well, there was a man who wrote a book called Point Zero, which was very good actually, because it dealt with something very important. Point zero, the point at which you start from. We're talking about when you actually begin to make any kind of improvement, when you begin to make judgments about anybody, when you look at where you are compared to where everybody else is, and you criticize everybody else, or assess other people on the basis of what you think they are doing in respect or in comparison, or whatever that is that you compared to yourself to what they're doing. So very often we can go along with someone else's evaluation of ourselves, and very often, because we've allowed ourselves to be snowed in by the considerations of others, we end up putting ourselves down. I always thought, you know, that there's no need to put yourself down, because there are people lining up there who will come along and do it for nothing. Some people actually enjoy doing that. And I remember once that I had somebody staying with me in the house that I was struggling to buy, and he did some improvements in the top of the house. It was a 3-story house in London. He did some improvements on that house, and of course it was an old house. We were all working on it, and he improved his little part of his little apartment at the top of the house, and he was a very confident man, and he made an assessment about the way that I worked and said, well, Terence, you get things done. I must admit, you get things done. It's not really that good, but you do get things done. And I'm there thinking, oh really? Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I don't do things that well. Whereas, he said, on the other hand, I have to take longer because I just have to have it right. It has to be done properly. So I thought, I can only aspire to being as good as this man. And then he moved out. And, of course, I went up to see this wonderful work that he'd done, and things fell off the wall, and things didn't look that good, and they weren't straight or level or plumb. And I thought, bloody hell, he wasn't that good at it. But apparently he thought that he was. And I realized right then, way back, 100 years ago or so, that people take you at your own evaluation, because I took him at his evaluation. But here's the important thing. I took me at his evaluation. Now, there is such a thing as making yourself right by making others wrong. So when you come up, and this is why it's so important to stay away from critical, bitching, whining, complaining people. Those who love to sit on the fence of negativity. Now, they're very clever at what they do. Make no mistake, being a negative person doesn't mean that you're stupid. No. Some of the most clever people that I know were the most negative. I used to threaten some people, I'm going to make you a t-shirt with an N on it. I never did, of course. Would I do anything so unkind? Yes. Anyway, you need to take yourself at least seriously, but with a sense of humour. Now, that's a contradiction. It's a contradiction, I know, but isn't everything? Isn't it true that you do things well when you're left alone? Isn't it true that you are able to do much better than you allow yourself in so many instances. Now here's the thing, is that courage comes in proclaiming right up front on something that you are not sure of, that you'll do it. And this often means that you have to put yourself out there in a vulnerable position on nothing more than the belief that something will come up to make it right. Now the most scary example of this, I'm sure that I've spoken about this before, but then I'm an old fart, aren't I? And I tell my stories over and over sometimes. But I was booked as an artist to do a mural on the ceiling of a quite famous comedian in Hollywood. And it was this man was called Drew Carey, and he was somebody that I admired and watched his show. So it was really good. Now the ceiling was this huge curved ceiling, almost like a semicircle, not quite, more like a breaking wave. Well, it had. I oversaw the installation of about $100,000 worth of fiber optics. Now with fiber optics, they didn't have the roof on; they had the roof off. And if you imagine that the roof is like this, basically. Well, what they'd done is they'd done the ceiling inside like this, and then the roof on top was left off. Now you go in and you take, well, let's see. Let's say that this is the ceiling like this. The ceiling is like this, and then there is a hole, and as you can see, this, am I doing this very well? I'm blundering around here. See, look, you can see there, that would be the fiber optic. So the fiber optic is pushed through the ceiling, and it's pushed through like that from the top. So we were on the top of the roof, and we would drill from underneath according to templates that had been made, patterns. So wherever the fiber optics were supposed to go in, we drilled up and into the ceiling. Then from the other side, we pushed a fiber optic through. So the fibers must go through like that. They cannot go through like this, because as you cut them off, it doesn't work. So it has to go through perfectly at right angles. So we did all of that, and then after that, when that had all been snipped off, the ceiling was faux painted, and it was faux painted so that during the day it actually looked a day scene. Now the mural that I was putting up was done in black light paint, ultraviolet paint, which responded to black light. So during the day you would have one painting which was done by another artist, and then at night, when ambient light was totally restricted by curtains, by blinds and all of that, you would shine on to the ceiling, you would shine these bright black lights, and the black lights would pick up only the ultraviolet paint. Well, the man who hired me to do this had made it very easy. Oh gosh, you know, it's really easy. It's easy to do a nebula. He wants some nebulas and some. He said all the lights are already there. The stars are already there. As the fiber optics came through, then they would be lit in another control room go through the fibre optic and emerge in the ceiling as a pinpoint of light, looking like a star. And it was very, very effective, looked really beautiful. And then my job was to come along and make it look like a sky at night. And I went along in my foolishness, I went along thinking, oh, well, for heaven's sake, it's going to be quite easy. You just put some dots on it. And on the night that I was supposed to start, I had to do this, it was thought, at night, because, of course, we were working under black light, so therefore it had to be done at night when everything was dark. And on the night that I was supposed to start, by the way, I was supposed to use an airbrush. So I had a compressor and an airbrush. Now, at that time, I think that this job had been going on for Drew Carey for some 4 years or something, for a long, long time. And he'd had either that or it was 4 different contractors who had gone in and tried to do the job, and they'd made so much noise that the neighbours in their multi-million-dollar houses around had complained and finally gone to court and got an injunction against the contractor that they were not allowed to work after a certain time, and they were not allowed to play radios. So they got some peace in their lives while Drew Carey was having his masterpiece of a house built. So there I am, about to start a job that I've actually tried. I've gone online and I found some pictures and printed them out of nebulas, and there are all different kinds of nebulas, you know. It's not just a matter of putting a few dots on there, okay? And I'd realised that actually I can't do it. So I'm thinking, oh, this is a bugger of a thing, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to do this job and I can't do it. Well, I'll try and work something out. So, I mean, what else could I do? I was supposed to go there. I'd been booked. I took my airbrush along, which I'd tried to get going, which I hadn't been very, very successful about this. Airbrushes are the most pernickety thing to get going. Anybody who's out there who knows how to use an airbrush, you'll know that what I'm saying is the truth. So I go along there with my little compressor, and a little compressor, as you may know, is a little bit like a small motorcycle. It's as noisy as hell. So when I get along, I'm starting work at 10 o'clock and I'm going to work all night. So I think, well, maybe 8 o'clock, something like that, 8 or 9. And I get there, and no sooner have I got there, and I'm, picking my nose and scratching my head about what am I going to do? In walks the boss of the company that I'm working with, and he's got his daughter with him, a teenager who's just fascinated about watching the artist's work. Isn't that wonderful? So I start the compressor up, and what I know is that you're not allowed to make noise after, I think it was 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And the compressor's making a hell of a din. So I shut the compressor off. Voice of authority said, oh, this is not going to work, is it? Because we can't make a noise. And so I then prattled around on the scaffolding, which I could wheel around to any part of the ceiling. And I broke the paints out. I got the paints out, and I'm busy. And then finally, they got bored and left. So then I thought, oh my God, thanks for... So then I get up, and I tried at first. I thought, well, I truly can't use the airbrush. So, because it's going to make too much noise, and I'll be out of work anyway. So how am I going to do this? Well, I looked at the idea in my head of what a star looks like, and a star is a tiny pinpoint of light. And so there are there is such a thing in the States as builder's shims, and builder's shims are long pieces of wood about 12 or 15 inches long, and they're wedges, and you use them when you put in window frames and door frames, and you can push the wedge in and snap it off wherever you need to, and it will tighten up the door until you can get it secured. So it's very much like this. If the gap is there like that, you can push the builder's shim in, make it rigid, and then break this piece off. That's how it works. Well, I looked at that, and I got an X-Acto knife out, and I split it down so that it was a very thin piece, almost like a drumstick. And then I dipped that in the paint, and I tapped it on the ceiling. It looked just like a star. So that was it. Oh boy, I was busy for the rest of the night going and doing the whole thing, and it worked out very well. But now I'm just thinking, yes, but what about the Milky Way? I'm not going to put up 5 billion of these things to form the Milky Way, which looks like almost like a well, it looks like the Milky Way, doesn't it? It looks like white cloud. So I had some cotton wool as part of my kit, and I got the cotton wool and I watered down the UV paint. I watered that down slightly, and then I dipped in my little wad of cotton wool, which was like this, and I dabbed it on the ceiling. It just worked perfect. It looked exactly like cloud, and then shining through the little tiny specks of light which I had drumsticked onto the ceiling. So then after that I worked very well. I did it at night, but then after a little while common sense came through, and I thought, well, why don't I just blank out the windows, you idiot? And which I did. And we put black dustbin liners, and we taped it on the windows, so the room was in total darkness, and I was able to work during the day, normal hours. And I worked and was very happy and enjoyed what I was doing. Well, I created this swath of Milky Way across the ceiling with different nebulas, and which I experimented with, and because I had to, and I was there on my own, I was having fun, what the heck, and it began to happen, and I actually began to be quite pleased with the work. And then what happened then was a reinforcement of my confidence, because the guys that were the construction workers doing the ordinary construction work outside, one of them popped his head through and looked at what I was doing and said, wow. Now, he was Mexican, so he said it in Spanish, he said, wow. And then he told his friends, and they all came in, and it was like unison wow. They all stood there and said, wow. And I thought, wow, they're saying wow at my work. And then I became the authority. Oh, yes, well, of course, when we do these kind of night sky, with the nebulas, I mean, that's the so-and-so nebula, and this one is the other nebula, I became very confident. And the more my confidence grew, the better I became at doing what I did. So I began to reevaluate myself as an artist in that particular case. So this is the point, that the man who criticized my work all those years ago considered himself to be point zero. Now, what is point zero? Point zero is that place where you are going to judge everything from. Now, when people use a meter of any kind, they establish point zero by putting the thing usually to set, and it will have a set point. That means that if you think of a meter as being part of a whole circle, how do you know where it is? You don't know until you bring it round to a point that you know is point, and you establish it at point zero. in a way, when you get into your car and you turn your ignition on, the zero on your miles per hour is at 0.0, and then as soon as you move off, it goes from dead still, to plus 0.0. Well, when people judge you, they may be judging themselves as being 0.0. So before you start accepting someone's idea of you, better make sure that you agree with what they are considering is 0.0, because actually it may be way off. How many times have you ever had that where it looks like your fuel gauge is either full or still on 3/4, or still on half, or still on quarter, and then you find out that quarter is actually down here somewhere. You've mistaken what the fuel gauge regards or is telling you is 0.0, and you've accepted that, but it's wrong, so you end up with no fuel. Now in future, what will you do? You will say, well, quarter is empty, so you re-establish what you know is 0.0. Now quarter full is actually empty, so you have to go to half on this particular gauge to know that you have any fuel at all. Well, when somebody else who stands up and says, yes, well, I've been looking at your work, and well, it's a bugger of a thing, but I don't think you're very good. Well, let's have a look at how good he is. So, find out. I remember that someone came into my studio workshop when I was in Florida, and he was a teacher at a local college. Now, I would have thought that he was very good at everything. I judged that his 0.0 would be my 0.0, didn't I? And then one day I saw some of his work. Oh, sorry sunshine, your 0.0 is a little bit out compared to mine. Was I right? Well, you'll never know, because you don't know what my 0.0 on artwork is, and you don't know what his is. You would have to see some work of mine, which I stood up and said, this is good, to know whether my 0.0 was an accurate point to view from. So when you take someone else's opinion as being the opinion, make sure that you agree with his 0.0, his idea of what is good. That's why they have critics. Now, when you have critics stand up and say, my 0.0 can be trusted. Now, when you read some of their criticisms about shows, about music, about art, and you are in agreement, then you count that he is right and his 0.0 is something that you can agree with. But don't take the 0.0 of anybody that puts you down as being true. The reason for that is you can't afford to. How can you afford to place your evaluation in the hands of someone who's just said you're a bit of a turd, aren't you? You can't do it. You have to stand up, move your 0.0 to where you think it's worthwhile and is a standard which you can stand up and be judged for, and then take responsibility. Now, just to end off, with my mural on the ceiling of that man, the woman that was the architect, or the architect's liaison officer, I was now finished, and they were called in to view it. Well, we stood there in darkness, and we flipped on the switch for the huge UV light. Now we're in darkness for 1 minute, not able to see anything, and then suddenly, bang, the UV light came on and lit up the entire ceiling. It was just a tremendous moment. But this woman thought, oh my goodness, you've ruined it. Look at it, you've done it, you've gone over the top. I thought, oh my God, he spent thousands of dollars having a faux artist come in and do the entire ceiling, and I've gone and messed it up. I said, no, oh, miss, can you just not say anything to Drew Carey when he comes in? Can we try to rescue this catastrophe that you have now seen? And of course she said, well, I suppose we better. And Drew Carey came in, and once again we stood in the darkness, me with my heart in my mouth, and we flipped on the switch. There was a moment, a very suspenseful moment, and then the light suddenly came on and the whole ceiling just burst with a night sky, just like the roof had been taken off. And Drew Carey said, effing hell, this is effing great. Oh, effing, this is effing. This is going to be my favourite room. And I said, Mr. Carey, could you say something that I could quote? Thank you. And he shook my hand. He said, you did this? He said, I know that this is what the night sky is like. He said, I've been to Death Valley. He said, and there's no cloud at all. And this is exactly what a night sky is when there's no light pollution. Thank you so much. So, make sure that your point zero is a good one. Thanks for looking in. Happy point zeroing. This is a foreigner in the Philippines. Bye for now. Sorry it's been a long one. Somebody must have moved my point zero.